Hello, and welcome to a new installment of Intriguing People. My name is Brandy, and this channel is dedicated to people I find intriguing, but lesser known to the greater population. This channel is new, and before we begin, I would ask that if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you want to find out about more intriguing people in the future, please subscribe. I will be posting 2 intriguing people each month. This channel is completely my work, no AI is involved. Today's intriguing person is Srinivasa Iyengar Ramanujan, an Indian mathematician with a singular focus on mathematics whose work is still being studied today. Despite a less than auspicious background, his genius was such that he eventually demanded recognition from some of the most respected mathematicians of his time. While I will be touching briefly on some of his work, I will not be delving heavily into his theories. Some of his work is still not completely understood by the world's greatest minds, and I certainly am not going to try. Ramanujan was born into a poor family on December 22nd, 1887. His family was Tamil Brahmin from an ethnic group, the Iyengars. The name Srinivasa is the patronymic derived from his family, while Ramanujan is his given name. Although his family was from a higher caste, being Brahmin, or of the priestly caste, their ethnic group was small and they were quite poor. They weren't at the bottom of the social standing, but they still struggled. They lived in the town of Kumbakonam in the region of Tamil Nadu. Kumbakonam is a temple town attracting many pilgrims. It is famous for the Navagraha temples, temples assigned to the 9 planets. Temples like Darasaram, a UNESCO heritage site, and the Ramaswamy Temple have some of the finest architectural marvels. This picture shows the humble house that was Ramanujan's childhood home and is now a monument. Just down the street from this small home is one of the more famous temples in the area, the Ramaswamy Temple. Ramanujan's father worked in a sari shop while his mother stayed at home. Healthcare was not readily available to the family, something that would cause problems throughout Ramanujan's life. When he was 18 months old, his younger brother died in infancy. Shortly after this, Ramanujan himself contracted smallpox in an outbreak in 1889. 4,000 died, but young Ramanujan survived. His mother would lose 2 more children in infancy as well. During the time of the outbreak, he and his mother moved to be with her family in Kanchipuram. This journey would have most likely taken 2 to 3 days with a young child. When his paternal grandfather died, he and his mother returned to Kumbakonam, and in 1892, Ramanujan started primary school. About a year later, he was sent back to live with his grandparents in Madras, which is now known as Chennai, but he hated the school there. After being truant and rounded up by the local police a couple of times, it was agreed that he would return to Kumbakonam. Back at home, Ramanujan settled back into his local primary school. He was close to his mother, who taught him the Brahmin culture, including songs and customs. Part of this were strict vegetarian diet restrictions. He finished primary school in 1897 and, at the age of 10, was already showing a talent for mathematics. To make money, his family took in lodgers from a local college. They worked with him on math puzzles, and by the age of 11, they were unable to teach him anything further. One of the most intriguing things about Ramanujan was his reported source of inspiration for mathematics. He said that his inspiration came from dreams given by the goddess Mahalakshmi of Namakkal. He had dreams featuring drops of blood, denoting the goddess's male consort Narasimha. These drops would unfold into scrolls with complex mathematical formulae. He was once quoted, "An equation has no meaning unless it expresses a thought of God." To further his education, one student loaned him a book on advanced trigonometry by S. L. Loney. He mastered it by the age of 13. While he was working, Ramanujan often used a slate to work problems, only putting final results onto expensive paper. This was something he would continue throughout his life that would cause some problems when others would study and try to prove his work. Most mathematicians would have pages of work before writing down a final theorem. By the age of 14, Ramanujan was receiving merit certificates in school. He also began helping the school in the logistics of assigning their 1,200 students of different levels between 35 teachers. He started complex geometry at 14, and by 15 had developed his own method of resolving a quartic being an equation in the fourth degree, with a quartic polynomial equating to zero, and that's about as deep as I'll delve into the math. At 16, he obtained a friend's copy of A Synopsis of Elementary Results in Pure and Applied Mathematics by G.S. Carr. This contained a collection of 5,000 theorems. After studying this for a year, he developed and investigated the Bernoulli numbers, a sequence of rational numbers that occur frequently in analysis. Yes, he studied 5,000 theorems in a year. Ramanujan graduated from secondary school at 17 and was awarded the K. Ranganatha Ray Prize for Mathematics from his headmaster. He then went on to attend the Government Arts College in Kumbakonam on a scholarship. Government jobs were highly prized, with India still being part of the British Empire, and the college should have been a stepping stone for a bright young man. Unfortunately, Ramanujan never paid much attention to subjects other than the mathematics he loved. He lost his scholarship and left the school after a year. Following the failure at college, Ramanujan ran away at the age of 18. He spent a month in Rajamundry before returning to Madras, now known as Chennai, where he had family. Back in Madras, Ramanujan enrolled in Pachayappa's college. While in the college, he worked only on the mathematical problems that appealed to him and, once again, ignored most of his other subjects. He failed his Fellow of Arts exam in 1906 and 1907, leaving school without a degree. He continued to work on his mathematics, working occasional odd jobs, living in poverty, and nearly starving. In 1909, he returned home briefly and married Janaki, a girl his mother had chosen from a neighboring town. She was 10 at the time of the marriage and stayed with her parents for 3 years before moving to Madras to join Ramanujan in 1912. His mother also moved to join him at this time. In 1910, a meeting between 23-year-old Ramanujan and V. Ramaswamy Iyer, the founder of the Indian Mathematical Society, led to Ramanujan receiving more recognition. It also led to his inclusion as a researcher at the University of Madras. While this position was intellectually fulfilling, it did not provide an income. He initially tried for a job in the revenue department, but after looking at his notebooks, Iyer recalled, "I was struck by the extraordinary mathematical results contained in the notebooks. I had no mind to smother his genius by an appointment in the lowest rungs of the revenue department." Iyer gave him letters of introduction to a number of mathematician friends. They then looked over his work and introduced him to R. Ramachandra Rao, the secretary of the Indian Mathematical Society. Rao was impressed, but doubted the work was Ramanujan's given his poor academics. Another friend, C. V. Rajagopalachari, interceded and testified to Ramanujan's work and integrity, causing Rao to give him another chance. After much discussion on mathematical theorems, Rao was convinced. Rao gave him the financial support he desperately needed. With Iyer's help, Ramanujan published his first work in the Journal of the Indian Mathematical Society in 1910. During this time, Ramanujan developed health issues and needed surgery that was provided free of charge by a doctor who came to the aid of the brilliant but poor young man. After his surgery, he searched around Madras for a job, going door to door. To make money, he tutored students at Presidency College. In late 1910, he became very ill again and thought he might die, giving his notebooks to a friend for safekeeping with instructions on how to distribute them if he did not make it. He pulled through, though, and continued his research on his small stipend. In 1912, he held a temporary job in the Madras Accountant General's office for a salary of 20 rupees a month, but he lasted only a couple of months. At this time, his mother and wife joined him, living briefly in Georgetown and Madras. They would later move to Triplicane. Later in 1912, he got a job at the Madras Port Trust as a Class 3, Grade 4 accounting clerk. The job was offered thanks to a recommendation from E.W. Middlemast, a mathematics professor at Presidency College. In the office, he often completed his duties quickly and then spent his spare time working on his own research. His boss at the trust, Sir Francis Spring, and colleague S. Narayana Iyer, who was treasurer of the Indian Mathematical Society, were encouraging of his research during this time. Even while working a low-paying job, Ramanujan was starting to gather more interest among the academics in Madras. In 1913, Iyer, Ramachandra Rao, and E.W. Middlemast presented his work to British mathematicians. It was at this time that he would begin to experience prejudice against a poor young man with no proper educational background as far as the British were concerned. M.J.M. Hill of University College London commented that the work was full of holes and that Ramanujan had a taste for mathematics and some ability, but lacked the educational background and foundation to be accepted by mathematicians. He then gave detailed advice on how to proceed further. The advice from Hill led Ramanujan to draft letters to leading mathematicians at Cambridge University. Some ignored him, but G. H. Hardy took a closer look. He initially thought that the unknown mathematician must be a fraud, recognizing some of Ramanujan's formulae, but others seemed scarcely possible to believe. Looking at Ramanujan's work on continued fractions, Hardy said, "The theorems defeated me completely. I had never seen anything in the least like them before, and they must be true because if they were not true, no one would have the imagination to invent them." Hardy passed the work on to J. E. Littlewood for review, who was amazed. Hardy later said the letters were certainly the most remarkable I have received, and that Ramanujan was a mathematician of the highest quality, a man of altogether exceptional originality and power. Another colleague, E. H. Neville, remarked that not one theorem could have been set in the most advanced mathematical examination in the world. In February of 1913, Hardy wrote Ramanujan expressing interest in his work. Prior to his letter arriving, Harvey contacted the Indian office to plan for Ramanujan's trip to Cambridge. Due to his Brahmin upbringing, Ramanujan refused to leave his country to go to a foreign land. He did send Hardy a letter full of theorems in writing, stating, "I have found a friend in you who views my labor sympathetically." At the same time, Gilbert Walker, a former mathematical lecturer at Trinity College, Cambridge, became enamored with Ramanujan's work and encouraged him to come to Cambridge. His endorsement led to a discussion in India with Iyer and Rao about what could be done to support Ramanujan since he refused to travel. This led the Board of Studies in Mathematics to grant him a research scholarship for 2 years at the University of Madras, paying 75 rupees a month. While working at the University of Madras, Ramanujan continued to submit papers to the Journal of the Indian Mathematical Society. One day, British professor Edward B. Ross stormed into one of the classes demanding if Ramanujan knew Polish, which he did not. The reason was that one of Ramanujan's papers predicted the work of a Polish mathematician whose paper had arrived in that day's mail. Although Hardy's correspondence with Ramanujan soured after he refused to come to England, Hardy instead enlisted colleague E. H. Neville, who was lecturing in Madras, to mentor Ramanujan and get him to England. Ramanujan finally agreed, and Neville advised that Ramanujan needed no converting, and his parents' opposition had been withdrawn. His mother claimed that the family goddess, the deity Namagiri, had directed her to no longer stand between her son and the fulfillment of his life's purpose. Ramanujan left India on March 17, 1914, and arrived in England on April 14, 1914, taking nearly a month by ship to travel. His wife returned to her family during the time he was in England, while his mother returned to her home. He immediately started working with Littlewood and Hardy. They reviewed his notebooks, finding some things incorrect, some already discovered, and quite a few new ideas. Ramanujan would spend 5 years working with Hardy at Cambridge. Hardy was an atheist who required rigorous work and proofs while Ramanujan was deeply religious and often worked off intuition. Hardy worked to help formalize Ramanujan's work so that it would be more widely acceptable, although they did clash occasionally due to differing backgrounds and approaches. In March of 1916, Ramanujan was awarded a Bachelor of Arts by Research degree from Cambridge. This was the predecessor to a PhD. His research on highly composite numbers was published in 1915 in the paper Proceedings of the London Mathematical Society. He had come a long way from being a poor boy genius in a small temple town in India. Finally, having a degree in hand, Ramanujan became more accepted and welcome among mathematicians. On December 6, 1917, he was elected to the London Mathematical Society. Then, on May 2, 1918, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. He was the second Indian admitted after Ardasar Kursetji. At 31, he was one of the youngest members. Following this, on the 13th of October, 1918, he became the first Indian elected as a Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. Ramanujan suffered numerous health issues during his life. His vegetarian diet was strictly limited by his Brahmin upbringing, and wartime rationing in England made this even more difficult. In 1919, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis and severe vitamin deficiency and confined to a sanatorium. Hardy visited him during this time, taking a taxicab to the hospital. This seemingly innocuous transit would lead to an extraordinary conversation and another facet of mathematical study. Hardy said, "I remember once going to see him when he was lying ill at Putney. I had ridden in taxicab number 1729 and remarked that the number seemed to be a rather dull one, and that I hoped it was not an unfavorable omen." "No," Ramanujan replied. "It is a very interesting number. It is the smallest number expressible as the sum of two positive cubes in two different ways." Today, the number 1729 is commonly known as the taxicab number, and the theory behind it has been thoroughly researched. In late 1919, Ramanujan decided to take the long journey back home. He was met by his wife, who he hadn't seen in over 5 years. Janaki nursed her husband through the final months of his life, but Ramanujan's lifelong repeated health issues and history of malnutrition finally led to his death in 1920 at the age of 32. He and Janaki had no children. Some writings on Ramanujan claim that he had no surviving siblings. This is proved false by the reports that his one brother gathered up all his notebooks after his death and passed these on to colleagues that had been close to Ramanujan. Ramanujan left 3 notebooks at his death with some 640 pages of theory. Much was without proofs, since he wrote little of his proofs down. This would lead to decades of researchers trying to prove his work. Hardy said that Ramanujan's discoveries are unusually rich and that there is often more to them than initially meets the eye. A number of new avenues of study formed from his work following his death. The Ramanujan conjecture is one area of research in algebraic geometry that was studied in depth after his death, and finally proved by Pierre Deligne in 1973. In 1976, a lost notebook of 87 pages was found and has continued to spark even further study. In the 40 years following Ramanujan's death, most of his conjectures would end up being proven by numerous other scholars. Ramanujan continued to receive posthumous accolades even into this century. Some of these include: Nature magazine listed him the year after his death on a calendar of scientific pioneers. His home state of Tamil Nadu celebrates Ramanujan's birthday as State IT Day. Stamps featuring Ramanujan were issued by the Indian government in 1962, 2011, 2012, and 2016. His birthday, the 22nd of December, is celebrated as Ramanujan Day at the Government Arts College in Kumbakonam. The International Center for Theoretical Physics created a prize in his name for young mathematicians in developing countries. Sastra University in Tamil Nadu has an annual Sastra Ramanujan Prize of $10,000 given to mathematicians with outstanding contributions in an area of mathematics influenced by Ramanujan. Sastra also established the Srinivasa Ramanujan Center and houses the House of Ramanujan, a museum dedicated to his works. They also purchased and renovated his house in Kumbakonam. In 2011, on the 125th anniversary of his birth, the Indian government declared the 22nd of December to be National Mathematics Day. And finally, Ramanujan IT City is an IT special economic zone located in Chennai and built in 2011. Ramanujan has now been gone for over 100 years, and yet we are still here studying and discussing a poor, brilliant young mind that was destined to leave too soon due to the ravages of poverty and illness.